Hey there, it's Laria. In this video, I'll go over how you can get into raiding as a healer. I hope this video is helpful for anyone who's new to healing, or anyone who is starting to play healer again and hasn't played it in a while. Some of my suggestions to get into raiding also apply to other specs and roles, not just healers. So if you play a tank or a DPS class, this video might also help you. Once you decide which healer class you want to play, my first suggestion is to go and read a class guide so that you can understand the basics of that class. In order to get into raiding as a healer, you really need to at least know the basics of your spec. One reason why you'd want to visit a class guide and read about the basics of your spec is because some healer classes don't always use every ability in their spellbook. So getting an idea about which abilities that you want to prioritize can be really good if you're trying to get into raiding. For example, Holy Priests have a spell called Heal, but they also have a spell called Flash Heal. Most Holy Priests use Flash Heal over Heal for a couple of different reasons. You might just use Heal in very specific circumstances or situations, but for the most part, you would need to understand that you need to prioritize using Flash Heal over Heal. If you go through any mythic Holy Priest logs, maybe even heroic logs, you'll notice that most Holy Priests are not using the ability Heal. Another example of a healer class not using one of their abilities as much, or maybe not prioritizing it as much, is Light of the Martyr for Holy Paladins. During my guild's early Mythic N'Zoth progression, I played a Holy Paladin, and I was assigned to the first Psychus group. Most guilds only send one healer to solo heal the first Psychus group, and as a Holy Paladin, you're a melee healer. Sometimes when Cataclysmic Flames would go out in the first Psychus group, I wasn't always able to stay on the boss and continue DPSing the boss to get my healer abilities off cooldown. Cataclysmic Flames also means that sometimes I wasn't able to stop moving to cast something. In these very specific situations, I would sometimes use Light of the Martyr if there was a player that took a chunk of damage. But if you're starting a new healer class and you don't go to a class guide, you're not going to know some of these things. You're not going to know the spell priority and the spells that you should be using most of the time. So going back to my first suggestion, it's really important if you are picking up a new healer class, or maybe you haven't healed in a while and you're returning to a healer class that you've played before, that you go and you read a class guide. I know that text-based class guides are really in-depth, and I know that some YouTube videos are also pretty lengthy, but if you're able to go and spend a little bit of time learning what your abilities are, learning what your healer class is really good at, and what you can offer for a raid, then you'll be better off going and joining a guild or a raid group because you'll have that much more knowledge about the class that you're playing. When it comes to class guides, it's always good to get your information from different sources. If I'm learning a new class or trying to read up on a healer class that maybe I haven't played in a couple of raid tiers, personally, my go-to for class guides is Wowhead. But when it comes to Resto Druid things, my go-to is a website called Questionably Epic. A player named Volk started Questionably Epic a few years ago, and they do a great job about keeping the website updated and offering Resto Druid information that is accurate and up-to-date. If you're not really into text-based guides and you're more of a visual learner, my suggestion is to go to YouTube, which is probably why you're here, so that you can watch some healer class guides. As a side note, I also want to mention that I've learned a lot about different healer classes just by watching live streams on Twitch. My main healer class is Druid, so I know a lot about Druid, but if I offer to swap to a different healer class on Mythic Progression for some reason, then I usually try to read up on the spec and make sure that I know as much as possible about it before stepping into a Mythic fight. Watching streams can be really important because you're getting all these different perspectives and points of view about the spec that you're trying to play. My next suggestion to get into raiding as a healer, or really any role, is to practice. I know this sounds like age-old advice, but it's true. The more you practice, the more comfortable you get at something. For healing, this is really important because you need to get a sense of how your class responds to damage, and you need to know when to use certain abilities. For example, Holy Priests have an AoE heal called Holy Word Sanctify. When the whole raid takes damage, you know whether you can just cast a Prayer of Healing or if it requires a Holy Word Sanctify. Because Sanctify has such a long cooldown, you need to know when to use it and when to save it for really big damage. The only way to really know this and to kind of get a feel for when to use certain abilities is just by practicing and looking at the damage that goes out, knowing how much your abilities heal for. Depending on how new you are, whether you are brand new to healing, maybe you've never tried it before, or maybe you haven't healed in a couple of expansions, one way to practice your spec is by queuing for LFR or joining up with a normal raid group. Personally, whenever I start playing a class that I haven't played in a while, I queue up for LFR. I know it's usually not everyone's favorite, but it is a really quick way to get into a raid group, kind of see the fights, and start practicing using your abilities. Joining LFR and normal raid groups is also a really good way of practicing your class with different healing comps. For example, if you're playing a Resto Druid, you will probably very quickly learn that oftentimes your Tranquility might be overlapped with a Mistweaver Monk's Revival. Or you might notice that if you're playing with a Discipline Priest in the group, that when raid-wide damage goes out and everyone takes a ton of damage, if the Discipline Priest knows how to ramp well, they will quickly be able to recover and heal everybody back up if everyone has Atonement. The more you practice, the more you'll start paying attention to these healer comps and learning about how different healers react to certain damage and how you can all work together to heal everybody and keep everyone in the raid group healthy. Now I want to focus a little bit more on specifically getting into raiding. If you're just looking for a raid group or a guild that does heroic every week and you want a dedicated group that you can run with, those kinds of guilds are usually pretty easy to find. If you're looking to get into mythic raiding as a healer, it's a little bit more tricky. Heroic raiding is a little bit easier to get into because you are looking for guilds or raid groups that have between 10 to 30 people on their team. Mythic is a little bit trickier because mythic raid groups have 20 people. You can only have 20 people enter a mythic raid. So you might find some guilds that have maybe 24, 25, 26 people who are all interested in doing mythic, and that's obviously over the 20-person limit. You also have to keep in mind that with a 20-person mythic raid group, usually there are only 4 to 5 healing spots on that team, versus maybe 12 or 13 DPS, or more if your mythic raid comp is over 20. If you have little to no experience healing raids, my suggestion is to go to wowprogress.com or go to the guild recruitment forum on the Blizzard website. From there, it's really important to figure out what your goals are and what you value, and try to find a guild that has similar goals as you. It's also important to remember that if you have very little to no experience in either raiding heroic or mythic, that you find a guild that is willing to give you a chance. In this case, you kind of have to find a guild that has similar experience to you, maybe a little bit more experience than you, so that there's some room to grow. If you're looking for a raid group to join and you're interested in doing mythic, and you see that the guild has already fully cleared the raid on mythic, and you have no experience doing mythic and no experience healing, that might not necessarily be the guild for you. WoW Progress and the Guild Recruitment Forum are really great places for you to be able to kind of look through guilds and find out what their progression is, what they're looking for, and what their goals are, and hopefully you find something that works for you. So far we've talked about reading up on class guides, practicing a whole lot, and finding a guild or a raid group that you want to join. With all of this in mind, it's still really important to remember that it's always good to connect with other healers. It's even better if you can find players who play the same healer class as you, but I also talk to healers in general, even if they play another healer spec, just so that I can get their thoughts about the raid, or mythic progression, or things that they've noticed about fights that maybe I haven't noticed before. I want you to know that if you want to be a raid healer, then you should. You should go and find a group or a guild to heal with. But even when you find your guild, it doesn't mean that, oh, you read one class guide, you know what your abilities do. It means that you should continue to improve by continuing to read class guides, talking to other healers, maybe joining one of the class discords, and making sure that if Blizzard makes any changes to any of your abilities, that you're aware of them. Let me know in the comments if you're interested in raiding in Shadowlands. Castle Nathria is the first raid that will come out. I'm really interested to hear if you are looking to play a healer or if you're going to try something new and play a tank or a DPS. So definitely leave a comment, let me know what you're interested in and what you're looking forward to in Shadowlands, and don't forget to subscribe.